Hello everyone, welcome to Agora. This is a podcast. I regularly do a Spanish speaking show, but every once in a while I turn on to English. And joining me on the other end of the line is Matthew Hutson. He is the author of The Seven Laws of Magical Thinking. Hi Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so basically what's this book about?
Well, it's all about our belief in the supernatural. And um, I argue that everyone, even complete atheists and skeptics like me, we all have a tendency to believe in these things, to believe in things like luck or destiny or life after death, or mind over matter or jinxes and things like that. It's because we've evolved to have certain habits of thought. So even if you rationally conclude that these things aren't real, there's still a subconscious bias or tendency to see evidence for these things.
Right. How do you avoid the naturalistic fallacy? Rape is natural. Other nasty things in human beings are natural. Why should we continue magical thinking?
Well, I don't argue. So I do argue that sometimes magical thinking is beneficial, but that's not based on the fact that it's natural. Um, Magical thinking can be good or bad, and that depends not on whether it's natural or not, but on whether it's useful in a given situation. So there's evidence showing that it can be beneficial for certain tasks. It can provide a sense of control, which can improve performance, and it can provide a sense of meaning in life. So one study I like to talk about is a study showing that um, so in this experiment, subjects were given a golf ball, and they were asked to make 10 golf putts. And half the subjects were told that the golf ball was a lucky golf ball. And these subjects actually made about 35% more successful putts than the other subjects. So just feeling lucky increased their sense of self-efficacy, which then increased their performance. And there were other experiments that followed up on this one, showing that if they were wished good luck or they had a lucky charm with them, then they performed better on other physical or cognitive tasks.
So,
And the other big benefit is the sense of meaning in life. So if people look at some negative event, maybe someone dies or they lose their job, and they say, well, this was meant to be, or this is part of God's plan, or something along those lines, then they're more likely to look for and actually find a silver lining. And it actually helps them cope and it helps them recover, and it prevents post-traumatic stress disorder.
right. I want to go back to the golf club, the golf ball example. So is this a
Sure.
sort of a placebo effect that you can use in sports? I mean, if you think that you're going to be good, then the prophecy becomes self self fulfilled.
Pretty
Is that
much. The trick is to not rely on that completely. If you just say, oh, all I need to do is use the lucky golf ball or cross my fingers and I don't need to practice, then you probably won't do so well. So you need to do everything within your means of control, practice, be in the right mindset, don't be lazy. And then on top of that, if you want an extra boost in self-confidence, maybe wear a pair of lucky socks.
now, what about the ethical line? Because I mean, among doctors, this is a very hot issue. Whether or not you should prescribe placebos to patients, because you're basically lying to them, telling them that a pill is going to cure them of something, when it's actually sugar or whatever else. Now, I mean, lying to yourself may be okay, but how about
Uh,
lying to other people using magical thinking?
Yeah, well, I don't really get into those ethical debates about when it's okay to deceive other people. So that is something worth considering. Should you tell your kids that Santa Claus is real, for instance? If you say that if you're mean to people, then Santa won't bring you any presents. It may get the kid to behave better and not beat up other people. But is it worth the deceiving the kid? And that's a debate I don't settle in this book.
Right. How widespread is magical thinking in the world? I mean, we have this idea that this is very proper of third world societies, Haiti, Africa,
Hmm.
India. we don't think that in New York City, and I think that's where you're located, right?
Yeah, yeah,
People are crossing the street, the fingers all the time, or they're
yeah.
avoiding stepping on white lines or anything like that. And yet, in your book, you provide some very interesting examples of how magical thinking still operates in industrialized society. So, can you give me a few examples?
Sure. So, maybe we like to think that we are an educated secular society, but really there's no society that has been documented to have zero superstitions or religious beliefs. So in New York City, for instance, a few years ago, they built a new Yankee Stadium. And one of the construction workers on that project, he was a Red Sox fan, and the Red Sox and the Yankees, of course, are rivals. And he buried a Red Sox jersey in the wet concrete of the new Yankee Stadium. And about a year later, the team found out about it. And this was in the papers, and everyone was up in arms. Everyone was enraged about this, thinking that, oh, the stadium and the team are now hexed just because this shirt is in the stadium somewhere. And so they figured out where it was, and they jackhammered it out, and they had a big ceremony in front of the press where they pulled this, the executives pulled this shirt out of several feet of concrete and held it up. And it was basically like a voodoo ceremony cleansing the stadium of this Red Sox hex. Um,
Amazing. Now, back in the 19th century, James George Fraser said that, magic really operates on two principles. Things that are alike are assumed to be the same, and things that have been in contact once are also assumed to keep contact. Now, evolutionarily, why would that be so? I mean, why would I think that two things that look similar are actually the same?
well, part of that is due to the fact that we didn't evolve around photography or television. Um, so having very visually similar reproductions of something is rare. We're not used to dealing with that. Usually if you see something, it's that thing. Um, and so if someone cuts up a photograph of your mother, for instance, then you probably, well, studies show that you would start to sweat. You become nervous. Um, and part of your brain is thinking that that is actually your mother being cut up. Um, it's also, there's the power of association. Even if you're not fooled that that is your mother being cut up, it still raises the idea of your mother being cut in half. There's still the symbolism there. And so you then have this thought in your head of your mother being cut up, and that's a negative thought that you don't want to be in there. And it's a thought that you know, of course you realize that it's not really happening, but part of your brain still treats this image as somewhat real.
Right. Where shall we draw the line? And I'm talking especially about rationalists and skeptics, about how much to tolerate in magical thinking. Because I mean, I think of guys like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, and they're not willing to give one iota of magical thinking. I mean,
Right.
they're they're trying to do a massive purge of magical thinking, whereas you say, well, no, we should be more tolerant. But where do we draw the line?
Um, it's hard to draw one clear line. I would take it on a case-by-case basis. Um, some people might benefit more from magical thinking than others. People might benefit more in certain situations than in other situations. So it's really hard to say, flat out, this is when it's good, this is when it's bad. It really depends on the person and on the situation.
Right. I want to go back.
And they would say, a lot of skeptics would say that it's absolutely never okay.
Right.
Um, but I think that's too rigorous, or that's too um, intolerant a stance. I think that it's sometimes okay. And we just have to be sensitive about when that is.
Is it okay to make fun of voodoo dolls and things like that, or we should never laugh at these things? I mean, and be more respectful.
Well, I think it's okay to make fun of anything. I think nothing is off limits for humor. So again, this is a situation of like, when is it okay to make fun of something? When can you tease someone about their religion?
Right.
And you really have to be sensitive about that.
One of the things that really got me interested in your book was when you speak about ethics and the belief in the afterlife. Now, you don't go as
Mhm.
far as saying, as in Dostoevsky's novel, that if there is no God, no religion, but you do mention here and there that the idea of an afterlife may make us more ethical. And if there is no heaven and there's no hell, it's hard to answer the question, why should I help you if you're not going to give me the return back? I mean, the favor in return. Because I mean, yeah, if I know you and you're not a complete stranger, it makes sense to help you out. But why should I give the seat in a bus to an old lady if I'm never going to see her again? And I don't believe in the magical stuff of heaven and hell. So my question
Mhm.
is, what's the grounds of ethics without the idea of the afterlife?
Um, so this gets into the idea of the conscience, and why do we feel bad about doing something even if we know that no one is watching us and God is not watching us and we're not going to go to hell for it. Um, and this is an issue in moral psychology that has not been settled. Um, there are a few ideas. Perhaps we internalize the norms of our culture or of our parents, and we sort of associate doing bad things with feeling shameful or being scared of being caught and punished. Um, One idea is that we want to prove to ourselves that we are good people, even if no one else is watching, because um, either it will lead to us acting consistently good in the future if we think of ourselves as good people, and therefore we're less at risk of doing something bad when someone is watching, which could lead to very harsh punishment and perhaps even death. Um, Also, if we think of ourselves as good people, it's easier to convince other people that we are good people. It makes us, the best way to lie to someone is to first lie to yourself. And in this case, if you're actually doing good, you're not even lying. So it makes sense to try to convince yourself that you are a good person. Um, and so that would explain the sort of functionality of the conscience.
Right. What about Pascal's wager? This idea that, well, maybe I shouldn't do something because I know that, yeah, heaven and hell doesn't exist, but just in case, let's do it. And that doesn't only apply to ethical stance, but also playing golf. I mean, I know that the lucky ball is not going to do any better, but just in case, let's play with that ball. I mean, could that apply, that Pascalian reasoning, could that apply to all spheres of life?
Pretty much. A lot of our reliance or our use of superstitious rituals like knocking on wood or crossing fingers is that even if you think the chance of them being real or of working is very slim, um, the potential payoff is great and the cost is very slim. So if you do this sort of a cost-benefit analysis, like crossing your fingers, it doesn't take much time or effort.
Right.
Um, there's very little cost. And the payoff, the chances of it are also slim, but uh, if it's real, then it could be great.
No, but
Um,
if you do this,
so it's better safe than sorry is
well,
the
that's
short way of
that's
putting it.
what I want to get at. If you do this cost benefit analysis, it becomes rational, and I guess in that case, magical thinking would no longer be irrational because you have nothing to lose. So I mean, would you be willing to say that some magical actions or magical thinking is indeed rational?
um, So it depends on how you're defining rationality. So in that case, if you're defining rationality in terms of whether it's purely logical and you're doing a cost-benefit analysis, um, I don't know. I would still put it at I would still put the chances of these things being real so low that it doesn't pay off. It's not logically rational, but it could be rational practically in that it has intended psychological effects. So I know that irrationally I will feel better and feel lucky for doing certain things. And so I rationally decide to play on that irrationality. Um, so there's sort of a double layer there.
Okay, we're almost finishing. One more question, because there's something that you didn't mention in the book, and I'd like to draw your
Uh-huh.
attention to it to see if you can comment. About fetishism regarding the merchandise. Now, this is something that Marx talked about, especially in consumer society, where, you know,
Mhm.
commodities are given special value way beyond what they're actually good for.
Right.
And, you know, this aspect of magical thinking has been neglected in much anthropological literature. Do you think this is the major feature of magical thinking in industrialized societies? I mean, this idea that commodities have some aura that really makes us want to consume them.
Well, that's a gray area, whether you would consider that magical thinking. I think our attraction to certain consumer products is not necessarily based on a belief in the supernatural. A lot of it is just conspicuous consumption, wanting to appear more wealthy or higher status to other people. Um, some of it is association with a brand. For instance, if you like Apple's image, um, you might treat it as might want to integrate that image into your own personality and associate with it, um, and sort of expand your own image and improve your own image. I think one clear-cut case of consumerism relying on magical thinking is if you are paying for celebrity memorabilia,
Right.
because then you're treating it as though the former owner of the object, the spirit or the essence of that person is somehow embedded in the object and is being transmitted to you through contact, through some sort of non-physical essence.
Right. Why do you think Fraser back in the 19th century said that we moderns have gone over this when it's so obvious that that's not the case?
Um, I think that's a sort of a false assumption based on a misunderstanding of psychology. Um, if you understand that there are different levels of cognition, there's, very roughly, there's rational thinking and then there's intuitive thinking. Just because you rationally believe something doesn't mean you also intuitively